Hello.
Hi, Mitchell.
Hi, how are you?
I'm very well, and I'm very sorry to be late.
That's okay. I was telling a joke and then I was about to sing, so we were making good.
So I came just in time to protect the people from your singing. Is that what happened?
Maybe. I'll finish the joke though because I was halfway through and
Okay.
it was it's three mothers that are sitting around and you've probably heard it and they're talking about how much their children love them. And the first one says, "Oh, my son loves me the most. For my birthday, he sent me on this all expenses paid trip around the world." This is pre-COVID, of course. And
Yeah.
the second one says, "No, no, no. My son, had built for us our dream kitchen. It took 6 months, but for the rest of my life, we will cook and eat in style." And the third mom says, "My son, my son entered Freudian analysis and talks about me 5 days a week." It's a huge pleasure to have you here. We've met peripherally a couple of times. You probably don't remember me, but we were both lost in San Diego at the EFT conference, and I helped you find the auditorium. And then it was funny because it happened again. It happened again in Toronto, where we found ourselves lost. And of course, in my mind, it was meant to be that we'd be speaking at some point. So I really appreciate that you agreed to come on. And many of the people here know you. You don't need an introduction, but I thought maybe I'll give an introduction just from my own perspective of how I, came to know your work. Kind of what touched me, and then we can maybe slowly move into a conversation and some of the topic at hand. Does that sound okay?
Well, hey, if you want to talk about how my work touched you, take 2 or 3 hours. Take your time.
I'll hold you to that. I I think there were two moments. There was a CBC, a Canadian Broadcasting Corporation interview, 15 years ago, it must have been. And you were talking about circle of kin. I don't even know if you remember that, but I haven't really seen that a lot in the writing elsewhere. But you were, I think, talking about the reduction of kind of circle of kin and how that obviously affects people in terms of loneliness or in terms of stressors in life. And the other place, and I'm not sure if this was in the Globe and Mail, but you were a pioneer in writing articles, controversial articles, I think, in the beginning about the correlation of, not so much stress, but even personality organization and ALS and Lou Gehrig's disease. And I think those were the first two places that I came in touch with your work. And then, for those that don't know, you spent a good chunk of your career as a physician working in the East Side in Vancouver, delivering babies, and I think as a general practitioner. And then slowly but surely, uh, things began to click, I guess, and maybe we can go into a bit of that today. And you wrote, yeah, a number of extremely deep and important books on attention deficit disorder, scattered minds, on the body's capacity to deal with trauma when the body says no. I think a book that is most familiar to people in the realm of the hungry ghosts. Um, you have a new book coming out, and you have a movie which is like coming out next week. You're on the heels of a huge launch of a film, so you must be very busy. Um,
Well, the first of all, thank you. The film is called The Wisdom of Trauma, and people can just check thewisdomoftrauma.com, and it's really on some of my work around trauma and also about trauma in general. It, it's the work of some California filmmakers who decided to make it. People can check it out online. They ask for a donation, but nobody has to make one. Most people don't pay anything at all, and they don't need to. Um, it's it'll be a week of interviews as well with some very leading trauma experts, Stephen Porges, Peter Levine, Reesma McCammon, Dan Siegel, Esther Perel, and others. And so it'll be a week of interesting conversations and the film being shown, and you can sign up for that. And yes, I mean, I'm a few weeks away from revising the manuscript for my final manuscript for my next book, which will be published next April. So yeah, I keep busy.
I well, congratulations. I can't wait to read it. And it strikes me that, I mean, even the film being made and this cohort of names that, have become synonymous with, the body, Peter Levine and the polyvagal theory, Stephen Porges, and the ways that we now understand, these really important ways that we've integrated our understanding of what happens to us under extreme duress. But, I was wondering, and I know you write about this a bit, but I get to ask you the questions that I wanted to ask you. And I've always been curious about what it was like early on when, you were writing, you were putting pieces out, for instance, about ALS. And, my impression, and maybe it's wrong, was that it was somewhat lonely or I mean, it must have been a risk to start to try to change the narrative. And I guess the question is more, connected to the film. I mean, here you are now in 2021, and you're amongst your peers, and this narrative isn't, I don't think it's not accepted in the sense that it's, it's still hard very often to cross through some of these hoops, but it's certainly more part of the popular narrative than it was. And I'm just curious what your experience has been, that trajectory for you as a thinker, as a physician and writer.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like right now, trauma has been really taken up by the public in a major way. I mean, this Bessel van der Kolk's best-selling book, The Body Keeps the Score. Bruce Perry, another wonderful psychiatrist, trauma researcher, new book, What Happened to You with Oprah. These books are both bestsellers.
Hmm.
My books have perennially done very, very well. They've been published in close to 30 languages now. And so, no, you're right. It hasn't entered the medical mainstream yet because they're extraordinarily resistant to all this scientific information. But it's hard to recall. But what it was like for me is I had this naive idea in the beginning that all you got to do is show something to be true, and then the whole world's going to say, "Oh, thank you." Wasn't quite like that. So that there's been a lot of resistance over the years. Fortunately for me, I don't care about that. I've always been very confident intellectually, so that I'm not saying I've been confident as a human being, but I've been confident intellectually. So that once I know something to be tried, I don't care who agrees with me and who doesn't. I just say it. I recall back in grade 5 in communist Hungary, my teacher wrote on my report card that he better watch it because he's inciting his classmates. It's grade 5, and in other words, I was saying things that I didn't like, or So I also had the capacity to actually speak what I saw, and I don't particularly care who agrees with me. But at the same time, not that I look back, it was frustrating at times and lonely at times. But you know what? That was a minor aspect of it. Much more important for me was that from the moment I began to write and speak, so many people got it. If my colleagues didn't get it, well, that's their problem. But a lot of people got it. I mean, people just want to know what's going on. People just want to know the truth. People want to know why they're suffering, why they're creating suffering for others, and what are the dynamics underneath that. So the support and the acknowledgement has always been greater than the being ignored or being countered. So I've had to say it hasn't been that tough.
Well, and so much about it, I guess, is content and form, meaning that I think what's defined you in many ways is your candor in your own life and not separating yourself from the material and the work. And one book I didn't mention, which I think is probably one of the most ethical parenting books that you wrote with Dr. Gordon Neufeld.
Yeah.
And I thought of it when you talked about on your report card that, you're inciting others, and with that book, Hold On to Your Kids. I mean, and I reread parts of Scattered Minds, just today before meeting with you, was about the capacity for whether it's parents or society, I guess, to tolerate a certain innate aggression or spirit in the child versus, reacting to it or shutting it down or pathologizing it. And so it's an interesting comment that you made that from the beginning there was this. I mean, were you uh, in your own childhood? Could you express? I mean, what would your parents, or I know, would your mom react to a comment like that? I mean, what was the environment for you, being kind of feisty and?
Look, I was always very bright and at or near the top of my class. So and my parents really respected my intellectual abilities.
Hmm.
They probably overemphasized them a bit. On the emotional level, there wasn't a lot of emotional expressivity in my family. My parents really loved us and they provided a stable home. But there wasn't the emotional expression encouraged or received. So I don't think I've ever told my parents how I felt, not what I thought, but how I felt. I told them what I thought, but I don't think I was ever encouraged to say how I felt about anything. Um, so it was mixed that way.
I live and work in Stockholm in Sweden. I'm from Toronto, but
Yeah.
we moved here. My wife's a Holocaust researcher, a scholar, and I think in my email to you, I also shared that on my mother's side, at least, we lost a huge chunk of my mother's family, and it's quite an interesting place to work because unlike Toronto to some extent, even though there are people always arriving to Toronto, I work almost exclusively with the expat community here. And for instance, a lot from Southeast Asia. And so this week, a man, just came from India was telling me that, if his sister uh, dated before marriage, his father would have killed her. And in Toronto, I would have seen this as ironic. Here I knew that he was actually being deliberate. And so it's interesting, when we talk about trauma, I guess the cultural framework of what can be allowed emotionally or coming out of war. I mean, I know that's why I got into this profession. There's people listening today that certainly were there along the way to pick up some of the slack in terms of helping talk about emotion. Um, and I guess the question that I kind of proposed to you, or that, I've been sort of holding in my mind. I don't know if it'll lead us anywhere, but it's certainly something that it. I think it came from me from something that Slavoj Žižek said when he was talking about the refugee crisis in Europe.
Mhm.
And he was saying something like, tolerance and, letting people in is table stakes. Like, obviously countries should provide a home for people showing up at their shores. I mean, that's the basic that we can do. He was making the point, of course, that people should be able to live in peace in the places where they're actually from. They shouldn't have to leave in the first place. And in my mind, this may seem like a strange connection, but when it comes to some of the rage that we have seen, whether it's the Me Too movement that was starting to call out some of these environments where rage was being expressed behind closed doors for ever, not just decades, but probably for hundreds of years. Um, or the polarizing political movement to the south, but geopolitically, of course, I mean, what happened in Belarus the other day with them just plucking, the sky out of the sky. Um, what's kind of been on my mind is that, to speak specifically, for instance, of shaming people, let's say someone is found out to have aggressive impulses in the workplace, or the top brass, at the Canadian military, for instance, right now. It seemed to me that all of a sudden things just kind of return to the shadows. That there's a kind of like explosion of guilt, or people losing their jobs, fair enough. But the conversation about emotion or pain, it seems to me that it often ends there. And and then my perception is the split just remains because it's like shame on top of shame. And I don't know if that's something that crosses your mind or uh, yeah, what you think about that.
To tell you the truth, Mitchell, I don't understand your question. I mean, you went from hold on to your kids to Schlabberjack to the refugee crisis to what are you asking me?
I'm asking you, fair enough. I'm probably just excited, Gabor.
Fair enough.
Uh,
Yeah, that's fine. We got the time. And I'm happy to be speaking to you, but I need to be clear as to what I'm answering. That's all.
of course. Um, it seems to me that these splits, which we can see on grand levels, like on macro levels, of course, between countries where emotions are maybe tolerated in different ways, or countries that are more repressive. Or to take an example to be specific, the Me Too movement, where people are, understandably vilified for certain behaviors. But then all of a sudden, it seems that then these become underground and they become movements that just become even more repressed or come out in rage, is at least my perception of things. And I don't know, like going back to the election when Trump won, I think Hillary Clinton made some comment and kind of vilified all of Trump's supporters.
Yeah, pardon
And
me.
that,
The deplorables.
right, right. And it seemed that the incapacity to somehow hold this tension, who knows if that shifted the election, but at least it
Okay. Okay. Well, look. So I'm writing this new book. I just finished last week. I finished a chapter on the trauma of politics and politics. To take all your comments and gather them up, politics is heavily infused with trauma. So if you take Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, they were two extremely traumatized people. Trump, anybody with a slight understanding of trauma would have seen that trauma in him as soon as he opens his mouth. Every time he speaks, it's trauma speaking. His denial of reality, his inability to stay on task, his difficulty paying attention, his hostility, his aggression. These are all the imprints of a highly traumatized childhood, which one always knew, but which was then documented by his psychologist niece in a book that came out about a year ago.
sure.
Clinton's trauma, and this is where it gets really interesting, was played out on national television, and nobody even noticed it. When she was nominated for the Democratic candidacy for presidency, there was a film about her life narrated by the voice of God, Morgan Freeman, and they told this little story about what a wonderful piece of parenting this was, that Clinton's mother wanted her to be resilient. So one day when Hillary was 4 years old, she ran into the house because she'd been bullied by some neighborhood kids. And the mother said, "There's no room for cowards in this house. Now you get out there and figure it out."
Hmm.
Now this is a 4-year-old. Now try and tell a mother bear if a cub comes looking to her for protection to chase them away. In other words, this was an assault on a 4-year-old's vulnerability. There's nothing more natural than a 4-year-old girl seeking protection from the mother bear. Instead, she was shamed for it. And the message she got was, your vulnerability is not welcome in this house. She develops this tough persona. And and she sucks everything up. So when her husband philanders around, she puts up with it because she's being told to suck it up. But the point is that this piece of child trauma is narrated on national television, seen by 15 million people, and nobody even notices that in the picture there's a child being traumatized. That's how trauma ignorant this society is. Now, when it comes to the refugee crisis and everything else, it's all trauma informed, not trauma informed, trauma uninformed, but it's infused with trauma.
Hmm.
So who are these refugees? They're people that come from countries that the West has colonized for hundreds of years and screwed up horribly. I mean, Syria. My son just came back from Syria. He's a journalist. It's right now it's under embargo. They can't rebuild. They can't get medicines. They can't get enough food because of an American embargo. Um, the Americans invade Iraq on a completely false lie of weapons of mass destruction. Everybody with half a brain knew that it was a lie, but it went out anyway. But here's what's interesting. You have Madeleine Albright, who's the
Secretary
American
of State.
Secretary of State, the first female Secretary of State. Well, who cares? Well, I mean, a mass murderer is a mass murderer of any gender. And under her administration, Iraq, before the Iraq War, was embargoed, blockaded by the Americans, so they couldn't import food and medicines. 500,000 children died. On public television, Madeleine Albright, this Holocaust survivor, or the children of, I think she's herself a survivor, like I am, and she's asked, well, is it worth it, the death of 500,000 children? She says, yeah, it was a tough decision, but we think the price was worth it. We think the price was worth it, 500,000 children dying. Well, what kind of a traumatized monstrous mentality would say something like that? And so then you have the Israel-Palestine conflict, about which I've been really engaged with as a Jew, as a former Zionist. What I see is my people inflicting their trauma onto the indigenous population of Palestine, and they continue to do it, and they do it horribly, to the level of mass murder, as far as I'm concerned. Not as far as I'm concerned, as far as the numbers are concerned. And this is barely even talked about in the West. So that trauma infuses so much of what happens in the world on all sides. I was, in my chapter on healing that I just finished writing, I interviewed the grandniece of Hermann Goering. Hermann Goering was the Reichsmarschall, head of the military, and the head of the Luftwaffe, which bombed Britain. And one of the pillars of the Nazi regime. Her niece, Bettina, told me about this psychic journey she went on. She's an empath and highly traumatized, and I interviewed her. And she said in one of her journeys, she entered the mind of her grand uncle. And it was like being at the heart of a monster. He was an opiate addict. So what am I saying? There's so much trauma in politics.
Yes.
And in international politics, but we don't recognize it as such. And that trauma is present on the side of the perpetrators. And of course, it's inflicted on vulnerable victims. And then when we create these traumas and then people try to escape from those situations, then they're foreigners trying to take over our kind of country. There's all this anti-immigrant sentiment. But this is on the part of people who at some point themselves immigrants, Like, let me say one more thing.
Sure, of course.
I just finished reading a novel called The Dream of the Celt by Vargas Llosa, who's a Nobel Prize-winning Argentinian novelist. And it's about a man called Roger Casement, who was an Anglo-Irish diplomat who documented the mass murder of Belgians a mass murder of Africans in the Congo by the Belgians in the first part of the 20th century, the last part of the 19th century. Now, let me ask you a question. Have you ever heard about the genocide of the Congolese?
I know, I see a Congolese patient actually, but I don't know, he didn't put it in terms of genocide, but certainly he's told some gruesome stories.
No. Do you know how many Congolese were killed by the Belgians and maimed and their limbs were cut off?
I don't know.
10 million. It's not even mentioned in our history books. And then these Africans want to come to the north to escape from the horrible conditions that we helped to create. And all of a sudden, we have this big dilemma. What do we do? Well, so I'm saying it's that screwed. Trauma upon trauma upon trauma.
Yeah, when I imagined asking you this question, because I've seen you so many times, of course, ask people where these questions are coming from, and I actually imagined you talking about this on the personal level, as in, because it's overwhelming, right? I mean, how do you face something as intractable as the Palestinian-Israeli conflict or the genocide in the Congo? And it it reminds me of when I was working at Michael Garron Hospital in the emergency room, and all of a sudden we got word that the RCMP was bringing in this guy that was making all kinds of death threats, and they
Mhm.
came in and they put down this stack of, like, 100 pages of everything they pulled online, and so we went in, and my colleague did, some kind of assessment, and somewhere in the middle of the assessment of asking about his sleep, and he said, "Oh, my mother was a Holocaust survivor," and then my colleague, said, "Oh, how's your appetite?" And when we were done, I said, "Look, I'm going to go back in there and talk to him."
Yeah.
And I kind of went down and I said, "Tell me a bit more about this." And it turns out that his mother was the product of an SS officer and a Jewish woman. And the mum had killed herself and jumped off the balcony. And as far as he could tell me, he'd never told anybody this. And,
Mm.
all of a sudden, this rage had a place for me. And, the only job I could do in triaging was to encourage him to get help
Yeah.
or to talk about this. But the way this connects for me is the way this trickles down. These, people end up all of a sudden in Toronto or Vancouver with, or the man I'm seeing from the Congo who's in Ottawa trying to be a stay-at-home dad with two kids, and there's no place for these memories are uh, very difficult to integrate or understand.
I wonder, be curious to find out what your patient actually, what your client actually knows about all this. It happened over 100 years ago now, but the ripple effect is still continuing. You know? And well, what you did for him, I mean, you say all you could do is to suggest he gets help. You did much more for him. You actually listened to him. And it's that not listening to the other that, you know, creates the problem. I mean, many of my Jewish community cohort and some of my friends, they've never heard a Palestinian speak. They've never asked what happened to you. They've never asked what's your experience, what's your feelings, what is your assessment. It's like we completely invalidate the other side. And now this happens, of course, in personal relationships. I mean, when I look at back, when I look at my 52-year-old marriage now, much of the issue when we had issues was that we didn't know how to listen to each other. We just didn't. Our point of view was just how reality occurred, and that there's another reality and another point of view that's that didn't penetrate. So
Well,
people are
my wife and I talk about this all the time, and she's Polish, and they've certainly had their fair share of trauma over the last few hundred years, and
yeah,
for me, the intimacy of that interaction, I mean, it gets so hot, I mean, somebody, you can't hide in a relationship. There's so many places you can hide, but I don't think you can actually hide if you really want to get close to someone. And it was amazing for me to go from having done so much individual therapy. I remember going to couples therapy, and it was totally different. I mean, and I do a lot of that work, and couples want to come in and learn how to fight, and I have to learn where they come from. I have to find out about their ancestry. And they look at me sideways sometimes. They're like, "Why are you asking about this?" I'm like, I have to know about the chain of attachment, and if there ever was some memory, or what was the memory of safety in your family? Was there some place that someone knew where they could take a deep breath and not expect things to fall apart? That I don't actually believe, if we can't touch those things, that we will ever really feel safe enough to let, as you often say, let ourselves cry or be sad.
well, safety is the issue, and of course, when people come to your office, they have no idea about safety because if they had safety, they wouldn't be in your office in the first place. Like, in other words, if in their formative years they had the safety to be themselves, they wouldn't need to see a therapist. But the reason, I don't want to put this sardonically, but the reason you and I get to make a living is that people are not treated well when they're children. And sometimes I laugh about it. Actually, I mean, I write these books, I speak internationally, and so on, and all these other people that I've mentioned, and you do your work. And what are we saying? We're saying something so simple. You treat human beings well, they're going to be okay. You don't treat them well, especially when they're children, they're not going to be okay. That's it. I've just summed up 100 years of brain research, you know?
We were, I don't know if you remember this moment. We were in San Diego, and he was a lovely man. So I don't want this to feel like I'm maligning anybody, but there was a French Canadian researcher who lives in America, and he was up on stage, and he had an hour long talk about this $1 million research project. I think it was focusing on what kinds of abuse cause what kinds of outcomes or symptoms. And I think you got up on stage and you said, look, let's take these $5 million. We don't need to find out what kinds of abuse cause what kind. Let's actually take this money and help children. I don't know if you remember that moment at all, but it was,
I
yeah.
don't. It,
Do you,
it,
I mean, you've moved into a number of years ago. I guess I think you were also encouraged to take your work and your thinking and turn it into your own, brand, if you will, but your own, to spread how you see therapy. It's called compassionate inquiry. Do you miss? Do you miss being a physician? Do you still do one-on-one work, or are you mostly writing? I'm just curious what that's like for you now at this stage in your life. And
I rarely do one-on-one work. I just don't have the time. I mean, very occasionally somebody will reach out and I'm moved to work with them for a little bit, but only to give them some sense of direction. But no, I don't. I just don't have the time. Uh, I have a lot of speaking engagements online. This is my fourth interview in 24 hours. I have a book to write. This is too much going on for me to do. No, but I do run a course. I should say I run it. I help to lead a course called Compassion Inquiry for therapists, which is a very deeply immersive year-long program. It's not for the faint-hearted, but what I've learned has been translated into a program. How I work with people has been translated into a program called Compassion Inquiry, and people can actually participate in the program.
there's a new cohort in September, I believe, right? That's coming in.
As a new cohort, yeah, we had 3 cohorts a year, sorry. So far, we've had about 1,400 people in 77 countries taking the course. Uh, for the most part, people say it's the deepest training they've ever received. Some people, they're not suited for it, and then they just um, we give opportunity for people to withdraw with a full refund. But so I do work there, and I am, and several times a month I have online calls with my students. So that's the in-person work that I do, but I don't do individual therapy so much. No, or in fact, hardly at all.
I I was thinking about this today. I know that the podcast that you're being interviewed on is called The Dignity of Suffering. And I think the name of it came, I was at a conference, I think in Ireland with my colleague, and I think it came out of our conversations about how our symptoms can be very much, cheapened in a particular context, or there's this kind of wild goose chase to get better. And it sounds a little bit from the title of your next book, right? The myth of normal. Um, but as somebody who's in the middle of my career and often working 40 hours a week, I often wonder how it impacts me when I walk in the door at night and see my own family. And I think you've even written a bit about, how that affected you over the years. But I'm curious, like how would you say it impacted you, really opening up these doors to and helping make space for people's pain? I mean, I imagine when I think of you that you draw obviously from your own history. And I know, my grandfather was, his whole family was murdered. He survived in the Red Army, and he couldn't actually even tell me the names of his siblings. I write about this in a chapter on trauma, that when he tried to, we both almost fainted. And I knew that, this is not a cavalier notion of talking about emotion. This man was not meant to talk about emotion. He was meant to survive that. He had a career as a dentist, to have children. And I realize on some level that is there. It's in me, this way that, but I'm just curious, when you look back, how you understand how this has impacted you as a human being in the heart of so many people's pain and.
Well, I can tell you a quick story. You probably know that I work with psychedelics sometimes, and particularly with this Amazonian brew called ayahuasca,
Sure.
which is a shamanic modality. So I landed in Peru 2 years ago now, to lead a retreat for doctors and healers and psychologists and so on. With ayahuasca, I was going to lead the retreat. The shamans give the brew and lead the ceremonies, but I do the leadership during the day, helping people prepare for the ceremony, identify their intentions after ceremony to help them understand their experience and then how to integrate them into their lives. To make a long story short, after the first ceremony, the shamans came to me and they knew nothing about me except that I was some medical from up north. They didn't know my history. They weren't impressed that I'd written all these books because they didn't know it. They just experienced me as I was there. And they said to me, we can't have you lead this retreat because there's so much trauma in you that you haven't resolved yet. You had a big scare when you were an infant and you haven't got over it yet, which is true. They said, and you worked with so many traumatized people, you've absorbed their traumas and you haven't cleared them out of yourself. So they fired me for my own retreat. And they assigned one of them just to work with me alone, while the rest of them worked with the group over the next 10 days.
What did it feel like when they said that? Do you remember what was happening for you when they
Well,
held
first
them?
of all, there was a big yes.
A big yes.
Oh yeah, I got it. You're 100% right. I got it. Number one. Number two, part of it was an egoic response. What do you mean I'm fired from my own retreat? And these people all came to see me, and how can I let them down? There was that big thing of how can I let these people down who came to work with me from all over the world, and now they can't. But I realized it was best for them too. Because if I was going to work with them from a stressed and trauma suffused place, I wasn't going to be at my best. And the people that came to work with me, they really appreciated that I would take the time to take care of myself, because they were in the same position. And these shamans said that they'd never seen such a traumatized bunch, because they expected when a lot of doctors and healers were coming that they would clear the trauma and the stress out of themselves. But these people hadn't, because in the West, we're not trained to do that. In your training, nobody ever taught you how to clear trauma and stress out of yourself. As part of your job, you work with these people 40 hours a week, you absorb their traumatized energies, and then you come home to your family. And these shamans picked it up like that. So that was a huge, huge lesson.
I want to share with you that I was at yoga today and I was crying my brains out. I went for a swim later. I was crying.
Yeah.
And something you said in Toronto, I think you shared a story about yourself doing LSD with a friend that, and you said something similar to what you're saying now, which is, look, I'm in my 70s. I still sometimes shake on the ground like a baby. And I just want you to know, if we don't ever have a chance to talk again, I want you to know that it has not only just stayed with me when I let myself cry, or I realize that I don't have to know. And in fact, there's actually something very freeing about, just letting it happen. But I know that has reverberated with the people that I see. And even a man as recently as 2 hours ago was sitting here with me, looking up at me, and he said, I think what I'm hearing is that it's okay. I think what I'm hearing from you, and I never say this explicitly, of course, so I'm always a bit surprised when someone even hears me saying anything, because I don't really know what I'm saying. But when that gets distilled in the way that things are held, I know I'm standing on the shoulders of giants, but I know you don't see yourself that way. I've appreciated your candor, and it has given me courage to put myself out here in this space and just be open because I don't think there's any other way. I don't think we can hide behind the walls of Victorian, turn of the last century therapy, and our relationships have changed. So I just want to thank you for your
Well, sure. And what I hear with your story and your client who says it's okay, maybe you didn't say it, but it's not the saying it. Again, it's the space that you provide where people can actually feel safe. So when we provide the safe space, we don't have to say so much. Um, there's that process inside people. By the way, I'm glad you go for swimming because that's the only way I stay sane. Right now, one of my I've been relatively untouched by COVID because all I was going to do is stay home and write a book anyway. So I wasn't going to travel and all that, like I usually do. So it hasn't impinged me on very much. But the major way COVID has impinged on me was swimming because
Mhm.
pool was shut down for a while. And then when they opened it, you can only swim one person per lane and only a few times a week. So I'm telling you, if I didn't swim 3 times a week, I'd be even more insane than I am.
Yeah,
That
no, I hear you.
for me, it's absolutely so essential. I mean, I do other forms of exercise, but there's something about being in the water that for me is the ultimate.
Yeah, the open swimming in Stockholm in the lakes is amazing. When you come,
Oh wow!
I'll I'll take you out there and
It's
I
warm enough.
wanted what's
Warm enough.
that?
Are they warm enough to swim in?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah,
Oh,
yeah. I'll get
oh,
you
great.
a nice wetsuit and you'll be toasty.
Oh, great, great.
I want to give a chance to people who made the time to come. It means a great deal to me that people are here. And um, a good friend of mine, Bob Williams in Toronto, asked, and I mean you've talked about it a bit, but I know that it's become more mainstream in the U.S. Right? The FDA has supported studies of
Psychedelics.
essentially, yeah, of ecstasy, basically small dosing,
Mm.
and he wanted to sort of, well, his question was the therapeutic use uh, of ethnogene psychedelics in the treatment of trauma, and what you thought about that.
Yeah. So, I mean, first of all, I've been doing that work for 12 years now or so. It's the possibilities go way beyond what Western medicine can even dream about. Western medicines have no idea how to deal with trauma. And the best we do is we medicate the symptoms of it, but we don't get at the heart of it. And especially with this doggedly biological point of view of mental health conditions, that it's a biological problem in the brain. Well, yeah, everything is a biological problem in the brain because the brain is part of the body.
Sure.
But what creates the biology of the brain is life experience. So when we're trying to change the biology, instead of looking at the life experience, we're looking at totally backwards. So and there's no proof whatsoever. I mean, I'm saying zero proof. I've just researched the subject again that any mental health conditions is caused by any chemical imbalance in the brain. Um, and I've said that having had taken Prozac myself for depression, and it actually helped me. But that doesn't prove anything because just because you take Prozac and it helps with depression, it doesn't mean that the depression was caused by a biological problem. For example, if you have a migraine headache and you take an aspirin and it helps you, does it prove that migraines are caused by a lack of aspirin? Or if you go to a party and you're feeling shy and you have a drink and all of a sudden you're the
Sure.
life of the party, does it mean that your social anxiety was caused by a lack of alcohol? I mean, it's just circular. So the point is that Western medicine doesn't approach these mental health issues, and PTSD is only one form of post-traumatic experience. Judith Herman, who's a Harvard psychiatrist, wrote a book in 1985, I think, called Trauma and Recovery, where she said there's only one psychiatric diagnosis: complex post-traumatic stress.
Hmm.
The depression, anxiety, psychosis,
Hmm.
bipolar, whatever, it's all post-traumatic stress
Yeah,
now.
that makes sense to me.
So PTSD is only one form, but because it's got criteria that makes it easy to identify, it's easy to study. So they've done studies now with MDMA, it's not the medicine by itself, by the way, it's MDMA supported psychotherapy. And I've worked with MDMA myself. It's amazing
Hmm.
what it opens up for people. And then you can really do therapy when people are completely open and their defenses are relaxed and they can experience emotions because the MDMA relaxes the amygdala, which is the fear center. Now they can experience emotions without being afraid of those emotions, which was the original trauma in the first place.
I was
So,
amazed. Sorry, I'm interrupting you. Go ahead, Gabor.
no, it's okay. Yes, there's been studies now with very encouraging results. I personally don't need a stitch more research to convince me that psychedelics can help in the right context, under the right guidance. I have to emphasize that. But they can do things that Western medicine can't even fathom. You
What
know,
amazed me, I saw those videos. I was at Bessel's old institute in Boston, and
yeah,
they showed what's his name. He's one of the leading researchers, right? He's a ponytail.
Michael Nichthofer.
Yes, he showed
Michael Nichthofer.
yes, with videos with these hard to treat soldiers, and
Yeah,
right, they were sitting on both sides of the bed, and what was so amazing for me was the poetry that came out of these men's. It was men that I saw, but
yeah.
the poetry that came out for me was almost like classical reading Jung almost. It was like this mythological healing that was taking place within, I don't know, 48 hours or something. I mean, it was, uh,
Well, Sigmund Freud said that dreams are the royal road to the unconscious. Well, actually, I would say today, psychedelics are the royal road to the unconscious. Because the difference between dreams and psychedelics is that when you're dreaming, you're not consciously there. And it's really difficult to interpret dreams, and Freud was terrible at it. I mean, his interpretations are hair-raisingly bad as far as I'm concerned. But he certainly got that the unconscious was speaking through the dreams. But with psychedelics, you're actually there to witness your emotional states and your dreams, hence the poetry. So whether with ayahuasca or mushrooms or MDMA or peyote or whatever people use in the right context, they can really open you up and you can get to see the what you've been carrying in your unconscious, just like the dreams would show you. So yeah, now are they a panacea? No, they're not.
no.
But are they an amazing modality that we're insane to ignore? Yeah, they are.
It strikes me that at the end of the day, there's a confluence in our lives that allows us to open certain doors. And the way I hold these things are that they're an adjunct to a very human process. And
Yeah,
I just find myself just taking a step back sometimes from ever, as you just pointed out, investing, these processes or even a therapeutic session with, with more than really just our human like attempt to make space and move the dial, and I think it sounds like this has the ability in some ways to circumvent or surpass defenses that allow kind of integration, uh, and yet the work still goes on. Is kind of my uh,
yeah. So what can I say? It's a small part of what I do, but it's also some of the most exciting part of what I do when I work it because the results are so gratifying, and I've seen amazing healing from physical illness and of course mental health conditions, and it's not because the substances. Like, see, when you're taking Prozac or an antipsychotic or a stimulant, whatever you're taking, you're simply trying to change the biology of the brain. As long as you're taking the medicine, your
sure,
brain will be in a slightly
sure,
different state. With the psychedelics, you're not trying to change the biology of the brain in the direct sense because you only, an MDM experience you might have 4 times, an ayahuasca experience you might have 2 or 3 times. It's your consciousness that you're changing, and that's where the healing comes in. So they're not drugs in the sense that you take them to change your biology. They're in a sense to open your mind to
hmm.
different possibilities and to look deeper into yourself. And out of that deeper look, will come a new outlook to replace the limiting and pathological ways that you might have experienced life before. Now that's, I don't want to romanticize it or to overstate it, but that's the essence of it.
Yeah, sure, it makes sense. We have about five more minutes,
Sure.
and I know that you've done a lot of work with your son, or that you've, at least pre-pandemic, you were having, maybe it went online, I don't, but
Yeah.
I know the relationship with my own son has been this incredible mirror and, yeah, and a huge deepening in many ways. I learn a tremendous amount. And I'm curious what it's been like for you to do that work or to work with him.
Well, so my son Daniel and I started this, giving this workshop called Hello Again, a fresh start for adult children and their parents. And we gave the first one in 2016. And if anyone wants to see it, just Google Daniel and Gabor Mate, YouTube, and you can see our 2016. And we actually on stage at each other's throats
Hmm.
sometimes. Right? No, it's a really good conversation, but the tensions, the parent-child tensions are actually acted out on stage because that's where we're at. So we've been doing this workshop for 5 years now. We're going to do it online again probably this year or in person, depending on how COVID goes. And we're writing a book about it. Hello Again, a fresh start for adult children and their parents. But he's also helping me write the book I'm working on right now, The Myth of Normal. In fact, you know what? If I can possibly, no, I was going to show you the cover, but it would involve a bit of complicated jiggling. But that I'm writing that book with my son, and he is brilliant. And he's not quite a co-writer, but he's also not a ghostwriter. Like a ghostwriter takes the ideas and then writes the book themselves. Now, he's not writing this book on his own, but he's also not fully a co-writer in the sense that it's my ideas and my analysis of society and health, physical and mental, and politics and social structure and all that. But we create each chapter together. So I'll write it, and then he goes over it and edits it and changes some of the wording or even puts in some of his own wording. And it's just a real collaborative process, and we bat it back and forth. And boy, have we learned to work together. So it was very tense in the beginning. We've been working on this book for 2 years now. It's been heavy going. It's just about done. A few more weeks. I'm very happy
How
with
is
it.
that different than your other work? How is the intimacy with
The
him?
other books I wrote totally on my own.
I
And
mean, emotionally, though, how is that process of being so close to him different than what you do otherwise? Or,
well, at times it's been tense because, of course, I want to be right and I want my way to be the way it is. And he's very sharp at seeing my flaws and seeing where I'm overstating things or where I'm losing the reader, you know. So I don't,
Hmm.
and in general, I take criticism quite well. But on my writing, I just want to be admired, you know. So part of me is like, what do you mean I'm not saying it well enough, you know? So at times it's been tense, and we've had to renegotiate it. But it's become a really beautiful working relationship. It's so smooth now, and it's so collaborative, and I just look forward to it every day to interact with him about the next chapter, as I do today, for that matter. So it's really good.
I think you helped me realize that I probably do that sometimes with my wife when I actually ask for her opinion for my writing, and
Yeah,
but I'm not really asking. I'm just, I don't really want to hear the truth.
yeah. I'm the same way with my wife, and she find it difficult at times to give me feedback because I get so tense around it, you know. But it's got a lot better, you know, because I realized that actually I can learn from everything they say.
Yeah, sure. One last question, which I found myself asking all my guests, and
Yeah,
what keeps you up at night? What uh
not much. I sleep. I sleep at night. And maybe if I get too excited, you know, like last night, yesterday, like what did I do yesterday? Yesterday I did 3 hour to an hour and a half interviews. I revised a chapter of my book with my son, and I Skyped it in or Zoomed it in twice. I bicycled to a demonstration to commemorate the deaths of these 215 children that were just found, these native children whose
yeah.
graves were identified victims of residential schools. And then I came home and finished the chapter. And so I woke up quite a few times during the night just because of all the adrenaline. But in general, I don't, when you say what keeps me up at night, you usually mean what makes me anxious or what makes me worried.
No, you answered, but you know, I knew you were being a bit cheeky.
Yeah, yeah. And
What do you
not,
think that says? What? I mean, I'm not in Canada right now, and I've struggled in some ways to. I think it's a very, you know, when people come to me here, right, international news of what happened, and
yeah.
I don't know, like, what? How does that wash over you in terms of our identity as a nation? And
Well, listen, the identity of any nation is based on lies. I mean, the Canadian national anthem, our home and native land. No, it's our home on native land.
hmm,
We took it, and that wouldn't be any problem, but we continue to do it. I mean, Israel did the same thing. They took the land from the Palestinians. We can't change history. No matter what you think about it, you can't change it. But do they have to keep taking more land and destroying their homes and denying them water rights and torturing their children? Do they have to keep doing that? So it in the States, it's the same thing.
yeah, the
This,
unprocessed grief is
that country was based on the brutal slavery and the genocide of the indigenous population. Okay, so that's what happened. You can't change it, but can you acknowledge it and do what you can to repair the impacts of it? But nobody's doing that. So that's how I feel about countries.
I want to thank you for your directness, not just today, um, but I found as I get older in my work, and I have, you know, one of my teachers is listening right now, and from a very early age, you know, in my second podcast, I interview her,
Mhm.
and she looked me in the eyes and she said, you know, there's no going back. You know, it was when we have to start to face things in our lives, and I don't want to, you know, there, as you pointed out, I don't know what the shamans would say about me if they took a look in my eyes.
Yeah.
I always get nervous whenever I say anything in therapy because I don't know what's around the corner for me. But your voice in Canada and around the world, I think you managed to bring together just a kind of sober look at what it means to be human and deal, yeah, try and just hold our pain in our families, you know, with our friends, with our patients. And it meant a lot to me that you came on. I reached out to you on a whim, and I said to myself, if I'm going to do this, I want to reach out to people who matter to me. And
Mm.
uh, I just want to thank you for your honesty and your work. And
Well,
I
thanks
hope
for
I
having
can do it justice.
thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to speak with you. Let me give you a quote before I leave here. Okay, this I was just looking at this. This is on denial. The writer is Nadezhda Mandelstam, who's a Russian writer whose husband died in the Gulag. He was Osip Mandelstam, a great Russian poet, and he was killed in one of Stalin's jails or camps. And Nadezhda, in her memoirs, writes, "People always clutch at straws. Nobody wants to part with his illusions, and it's very difficult to look life in the face. To see things as they are demands a superhuman effort. There are those who want to be blind, but even among those who think they're not, how many are left who can really see, or rather who do not slightly distort what they see to keep their illusions and hopes alive? And really, our job is just to keep tearing away at that veil of illusion that most of us have suspended between ourselves and reality out of our deep pain. So thanks for this opportunity to do that a little bit, and I wish you all the best.
Yeah, and I'll give you the last word. I wish you all the best as well, and good luck with the film. I'll be watching and your book.
Take care. Bye bye.
Okay, bye bye. And thank you to all those that joined us today. You can find me the Dignity of Suffering podcast. This will come out on Tuesday. If you liked it, let your friends know. And we'll see you soon.